Hello, and welcome to another round of Cloud Secrets to Go. I'm Rasmus, and I'll be your host here today, where we are doing another session. So excuse me 1 second, I have a nice echo here, and it's gone. So today I have a great guest, Gustav from Microsoft, who will take us through 9 cool features of AKS. And as always, we encourage questions, interactions, etc. I know we are on YouTube and Twitch today, but you can still interact with us via the chat window. Also, we have a survey rotating on the screen now. I'll also share a link in the chat when Gustav starts talking. And I encourage you to provide feedback to us as always. And actually, to the extent we're asking, what would you like to hear next? We have emptied our backlog, the Azure USerGroup planners. So the people behind the organizing of the events are meeting in a couple of weeks, and we want to build out our backlog of stuff you want to hear, but also learn when should we plan these events, what time of day, is it working for you, should we move to a different platform, all that kinds of stuff. So it's a super fast survey. So please take a moment and provide feedback to us. And I would say most importantly, to Gustav speaking today and give your appreciations there, as well as to the organizers on who you would like to see up in the next round of Cloud Secrets to Go. So with that said, let me welcome today's rockstar speaker, Gustav, welcome. And you're super muted.
Yeah, I'm new to this. Sorry about that. Thank you. This is weird, but let's see if this works out now.
No, of course. And actually, Gustav and I had actually agreed to go to a studio today and do this broadcast here. But then, yeah, you all watch the news. At least here, if you're not from Denmark, we were encouraged to practice additional social distance. So I'm actually at work today, but Gustav, I think you're at home.
Yeah.
So thanks a million for taking time and joining us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but Gustav is an awesome black belt working for Microsoft as part of the engineering teams there. On a global role, so Gustav sees a lot of customers and has a lot of customer interactions. So specifically, I picked Gustav to join us today because he has real-world experience from seeing some of the largest Kubernetes on Azure installments in Europe. Isn't that correct?
Spot on.
Okay,
spot on.
Cool.
Yeah,
not just expectations at all, right?
yeah. We'll see the outcome of that later on the survey.
Excellent. So for the audience here, again, Gustav have asked for interaction, so please ask a question. And actually, I have the first question for you, and please use the comment field on the stream. So in YouTube, it's the chat window. So just give us an indication of how experienced you are with working with Kubernetes, either on Azure in AKS or just in general. So from experience to junior to beginner to I know nothing at all.
1 to 10. 10 is
AKS.
You do Kubernetes contribution.
Yeah.
You need to translate.
No. So there's a comment from Anders. For those of you who doesn't know Gustav, he's been carrying a beard for a couple of years now.
And don't worry, I can recognize myself. It's super weird as well. Even my baby doesn't recognize me.
Okay.
So yeah.
You look 10 years younger. So
thank you.
Good on you. Great. I'll relay the comment as they come in. We didn't have a lot, but again, Gustav is looking for an indication of how experienced you are with AKS. I deliberately put AKS in the title of the session, so we would learn people who actually understands what the acronym means. So I think that's the bar, at least, but probably further up there. So, Gustav, I won't steal more of your time. I'll just leave the stage to you. Bring up your presentation here. And hopefully you will take it from there. I'll take a step back and I'll join you again if we have some good questions from the audience, which I'm sure we will have. So take it away, Gustav.
Thank you so much. And if people can recognize me, this is how I used to look like, and with a big beard. And now it's gone. Corona times, right? So as Rasmus said in the beginning as well, my role is about helping customers with technical bloggers typically, and we typically focus on larger customers that has a big impact, and it's often also those customers that are challenging the products to its edges, and that's why I'm here. So I basically fly around the EMEA region, and I have a team of 12 that I'm in a team with. Super cool guys. So we try to help each other out, covering all the EMEA region. And we're a global organization, so there's an identical team in APAC and in the US as well. I've been in Microsoft for almost 12 years and started on the Azure journey before it actually started. Almost said like I've been 12 years experience on AKS, but that Kubernetes didn't exist for that long period of time. But my focus is on mostly on Kubernetes and Kubernetes related ecosystem product and so forth. And I've been working on that since we were pre-releasing stuff, and I still remember we had a Power BI dashboard, seeing our first customers popping up and reaching out to them together with engineering, saying like, hey, what are you guys running? Do you need any help architecting and stuff like that? So that's my job role. So I do deep dives with a lot of my customers on the development side as well.
Gustav, you asked for feedback, so I'm just going to interrupt you now. So good. We have some feedback, actually. It came in just as you started speaking. And generally there's a consensus that people have been working 2 or 3 years with Kubernetes.
Awesome.
So we do have some experience there. All people actually are learning it day over day. So that's the general feedback.
Awesome. So that's really good to hear, because then I can also focus on more how you should think about it today and going forward. So that was actually to my next point. The presentation is, I was asked by Rasmus to think of 9 cool features, but then I thought of these could be fun to talk about different kinds of stuff and also some new stuff, but I would rather take it from a production environment angle and talk about what are customers doing in this space. And that's typically a tough one, because the ecosystem is so big. Kubernetes in itself is a beast, and what it is today is actually not what it was originally intended for. But that's a whole different story. That's good to talk about over a few beers. But it is what it is today, and we need to address that. So let me start slowly talking a little bit about what we have today when we actually start deploying Kubernetes clusters. So roughly speaking, when you deploy Kubernetes, you almost have something looking like this. But what you really want to have is ending up with something that looks a little bit like this. This means that we need to think about how we're going to be managing the public IP addresses. Are we going to have a private cluster? Do we need to have a firewall in front of our ingress data that comes in? How should we configure the load balancer? We need to make sure that it's capable enough to be able to scale all the snatting that's happening from the code. We need to configure the clusters with the right namespaces, with the right access. We need to have the cluster scaled itself out on the numerous types of nodes we support, both Windows and both Linux. We need to have some form of identity connected to it. Now, since this is on Azure, we can also utilize the AAD offering. And there's also this thing about DevOps and pipelines, and how does that basically play in? I'm going to leave most of that out of this talk today, because that in itself is pretty big. But I'm going to touch a few bullet points here and there. We're going to be talking a little bit also about how we need to think about compute, and how we're going to do monitoring, logging, And what about security, and how should we basically manage all of these? So these are sort of touch points I'm gonna have today. And most of the stuff that I'm actually going to be talking about will be more or less based on 1.18, which we currently are rolling out worldwide today. So remember, we only have N-2 support availability for clusters. Good. So what is the challenges today we see in Kubernetes? And this is based on what I typically see, and I try to fit it inside a single slide. So first of all, is debugging Kubernetes is freaking hard. It's nothing you do out of the box, and everyone that says that Kubernetes is smart, easy, they lie. It's definitely not. It's difficult. So our goal from a product perspective, at least from an AKS perspective, is that we want to and need to make it more simple, basically. And that's both from the CLI perspective, how you provision stuff, but also give a portal experience. I still believe, if my memory serves me right, that about 50% of all deployments are actually from the portal, which still surprises me. But I guess it's most for dev and test. So the top mistakes / challenges I typically see out there, and then I'll do a deep dive more or less on all topics afterwards as well, and some additional ones as well. When you select the t-shirt size from the VM, we need to make 100% sure we have enough IOPS. That's definitely a big one. We need to make sure that we have enough IOPS. That needs to, what I typically say is that the developer that codes the application should have a good indication about what he needs from a CPU and memory perspective, but also the IOPS. Some organizations, when they provide clusters, they have multi-tenancy within inside the cluster. And a lot of the developers, when they shoot in pods, the applications, they often think that they have unlimited of resources. If you're a good platform engineer, you would typically also set some constraints on how much you can able to use on a given namespace, because that's how you want to segregate access and resources as well. So we need to be sure that that's provisioned properly. You can actually do that directly from when you create a node pool. You select how an OS disk should look like. So to just remember when you actually do that, to have that in place as well. So that's a fairly straight one. Memory leak. Often when I see clusters, when I'm thrown into debugging clusters, I have often encountered that the software that company is using had a memory leak, and that basically meant that they were scaling up a lot of pods, and it will only happen after 20 minutes. And there are some weird things to catch up on. So that's a top one I've seen a lot of times. I've also seen it when companies actually buying third-party tools for their CRM systems or for internal apps or different kinds of applications that they need, and then they're going to be standardizing on top of that. And some of them has years and years of experience, but the code base and how they write code is more designed for running on a virtual machines than it is for a microservice. So the microservices can easily be challenged with the amount of resources you've been dedicated to, and then you will typically hit a wall constantly because there's not enough resources out there for you. So we need to be able to cope and understand how to write these. And just as an example, we also see the migration of classic .NET applications to remote procedure calls, and how you're going to be optimizing all of these calls, and how you should reuse existing snap ports that has been created, and so forth. So this in itself is an extremely big topic, but an important one that I often talk about with a lot of my customers. So I do these mini workshops for them to make sure that this is not something they run into. And then network design. How are we going to be integrating with our existing clusters with what we have on premises today? When the network design were originally designed for on-premises, they used the /8, and they basically occupied the whole VNet scope. So there's no more left the UDRs, and what should we basically do? And they need to fiddle around how to do a lot of this. So these two worlds don't always get together. So sometimes we see them basically separating all of that. Rasmus, I think you had a good name for this, which I can't remember now, but it's about isolating apps for themselves. So in case of disaster, or an attack or anything similar, you won't take the whole thing down. I think my baby's trying to break into me in my room. Then that's the networking part, but also traditional stuff. Who takes ownership? A lot of the organizations that I've been working with are fairly big, and they can't really decide on who actually has the ownership. Is it the product team that works in a specific silo? Do they manage the cluster itself? Do they patch it? Do they reboot the nodes? Do they add the Azure AD authentication? How should they configure the firewalls, and etc., etc.? Who actually has the ownership? There's different kinds of models when it comes to this, and I'm sure that Rasmus has a really good take on this as well. But it's more or less of designing a good plan when you grow your applications and the footprint of Kubernetes as well. And then the last one also, what should be kept in a Kubernetes cluster and what should be kept outside. The rule of thumb I typically have is that all databases, keep them outside unless you know really what you're doing. I have a good friend working for one of the largest gaming companies. They know what they're doing. They're keeping the databases inside the Kubernetes clusters, but also stuff like Kafka and all your messaging systems. That is a difficult one because I see a lot of those customers that have it outside of the clusters, but I also see a big tendency of having it inside the Kubernetes cluster. So that's a lot of examples. When would it make sense to have something inside, and when would it make sense to have something outside? So I will leave it here, and then we'll go through troubleshooting and how you should look at clusters at a later stage in the presentation as well. So number one, and for you guys that have been running on Kubernetes for a while, it doesn't really matter if you're running on any other clouds than ours, but it's the same challenge you need to think about. First of all, when we started introducing service meshes, the concept was basically we need to have all the security elements in there. We need to make everything super secure. We need to have a lot of additional features which we don't really want to use. So Linkerd was actually one of the ones that actually came up with the idea that we should have something that's super lightweight. So they went on a different path compared to Istio, where Istio is a big, generally speaking, is a big machine, whereas Linkerd that basically went a different path. They wrote the agent in Rust, and basically most other service meshes are based on Envoy, which is also ridiculously cool. So it really depends, and we saw a big tendency that's super cool, but still the feedback to at least Microsoft, the companies that I've been working with, is that they would like to have something that's out of the box, super simple, and that's why we also introduced the open service mesh for AKS. We're going to open up for the public preview soon. You can still play around with it with the GitHub repo. It's still alpha, but we're going to be moving it up in a short period of time. The general idea is also to give the basics of having something that customers shouldn't worry too much about, and those features that should just have that out of the box, and not give them a big one. That's different big service meshes out there. I even have no, that's the Ingress one now. Sorry. There's a bunch of other ones. I just took the biggest ones I typically I see out there. Ambassador, I see that's super popular in south of Denmark. HashiCorp, I see them being spread out all over the place. And HashiCorp in general is just ridiculous. Cool company, and they do a lot of funky stuff. Taking it a step further, that's a lot of stuff when you need to think about service meshes, and what you first of all need to think about is that it doesn't matter what you do, but you're going to be putting additional load into your cluster, and the key here is that it doesn't really matter what you configure or you add of monitoring tools or etc. Be mindful of all the stuff that you put inside the cluster, and it doesn't really matter what it is. And this is also a fact when it comes to service meshes. You need to think about how you're going to be doing traffic management, security, and how you're going to do observability in this sec as well. Traffic management, how you're going to do this, and how you're going to monitor it. we need to make sure that that is in place. We need to make sure that we have dynamic routing as well. Waiting, mirroring, something fails, you can recreate the route path to something else, etc., etc. So that's definitely something that's key. We also have the service mesh interface, which is actually something that originated from our engineering team. Let's see if I can just push one up here. And the general idea is that we want to write a specification that other vendors can use. So we focused on more or less these four bad boys we have here. How we're going to be doing green light deployment with traffic split. Have that in place and control all of these. We also want to be able to scale with different kinds of specific metrics. It shouldn't just be incoming traffic, but also package sizes maybe, or that well, traffic in itself can be a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go in details for this, but also what kind of traffic should we also allow? So that's a lot of stuff that we can do and accelerate. So the general idea behind this was actually just to create a service mesh and have those as a specification that a lot of other products are using and can use if needed. And this is also what ours, the open service mesh is going to be a part of. And the general idea is to have it there out of the box through the portal experience. That means if you create a new cluster, you will be going through a bunch of click-throughs, and then service mesh would also be, if you want to have that enabled out of the box. We're still discussing some fine-grained details about we should be hosting the service itself, but it's most likely going to be inside the worker nodes, both the control plane and data plane. So that's roughly speaking about the service mesh. So let me walk you through how this actually would look like when it comes to Linkerd. I think Linkerd has a really cool product. They do a lot of funky, cool stuff. So let's do that. So in this case, I have a cluster running. I have a namespace called Book Apps. It's running an offer and a book websites, and the front end is basically linking into those. So this is just my cluster running. I can also go in and check actually how that looks like in itself. So let's do Linkerd dashboard and get that up running. And then I have a dashboard in here as well. So one of the cool things about Linkerd, at least, is also that they do have a simple, lightweight website. They talk about which namespaces has been meshed. I can see that I have a book app that's collecting a success rate of almost 80% of all incoming traffic. And of course, like most service meshes, they have a direct integration to Grafana. So you can actually watch all these success rate from in here as well. I see a lot of the larger companies, they have basically all cluster monitor with Prometheus, and then they have a top Prometheus dashboard where all the clusters are talking into, which is also pretty cool. So that's all nice. Traffic split, which I talked about earlier, is also something that's out of the box integrated into namespaces, so you can actually see how the weight is going. So, for example, if you do blue-green deployment, you would actually be able to configure a lot of the traffic split directly in from here. We can go into the namespace, and we'll give you an overview about how things are actually performing. So this is a good way to debug and drill down in to see what's actually happening. So you can see that I have a web page. That's what traffic is going to, and the web page actually collecting books and offers in this case, which is all super nice to actually see that. So that's a fairly simple way of actually looking stuff. You can also drill in and see what the percentage are for success rates, books, deployments from offers and the books. So it's a fairly cool way of actually seeing how things are going. You can also see the live calls. You can see the route metrics as well. What I think is key for at least for Linkerd is the possibility to actually do what we call tabbing. So you can actually go in and tab all the calls that's actually happening behind the scenes. So So I have that in here, and can actually also see the whole HTTP status with a bunch of 500, which is basically failing. And in this case, I have an application running with a success rate of almost 50 to 80%, and the rest should basically fail. So that's why that's popping up. So it's actually quite nice to have the possibility to go in and see how things are working. Usually, you would probably also get some of these views in a monitoring tool, depending on what you want to be using. And then there's always the differentiator. Should I go with something like Datadog? Should I go with Container Insights, which is native from the Azure platform itself? Or can I just use Prometheus, Grafana, and something like Linkerd for my application stuff as well? It's always a balance between logs and metrics and how you want to be storing that. And there's different things you need to think about when you start looking in to a bunch of these stuff in here. One of the cool things that actually also comes with is it also has its own custom resource definitions. And that basically means that you also have the possibility to do everything in CLI. And a lot of the folks love looking at CLIs. So in this case, it's basically giving me an overview from deleting books, getting books, and posting books, and putting books in here. And I can see the success rate of that just from a CLI perspective. All this is native Kubernetes. There's no magic behind it. You just need to create your own custom resource definition. And I see a lot of customers actually liking seeing they actually do like this. So just bear that in mind. That's definitely something that's possible as well. Good. So in respect to time, let me fast forward a little bit. There's also this thing called Windows. It's originally from Microsoft, and it's definitely something that's starting to pop up, believe it or not. Especially in the Nordics, where the general footprint of .NET is pretty big. I would be so keen to say that we probably have a footprint of 60 to 70% of .NET in the Nordics, and that is in itself also, of course, creates a lot of interest for Windows. So I always say that if you have something that's Windows based, that's super cool, but try to push for core instead and host it on a Linux node. And if you can't do that, you try again. And if you can't do that, then you will need to test out if it works as you expected it to do. There are some stuff that still is the roadmap is fairly big, and even let me actually jump into the there's a public repo as well for the website, and let me see if I can push that in here. So this is a fairly good place to rush our public roadmap. Calico support is out. The paid version, that's definitely something you can do now. They just released last week a open source version. If there's a need for that, you should definitely try that out. We do not have support for KubeNet, and right now it doesn't look like the community is pushing towards that at all. So it's only going to be CNI based. We also have the AHub integrations that I succeeded in pushing that heavily last week. But it basically means if you have some applications running on premises and you want to move that to Azure, that's going to be a hybrid benefit discount for doing so. So we are also sharing some of the internal stuff with the underlying VM and actually the container images, how that looks like with other cloud vendors, so they can utilize and understand better what are we doing from a kernel perspective and so forth. It's not on pair 101 to what you're used to from Linux, and to be honest, it's going to take some time before it comes up there. If you do have some basic needs for running a Windows workload, it's definitely possible, not without a doubt. I would even go too far as say that you're not going to find any other platforms to host it better than Azure, because we basically designed the whole kernel. So that's definitely for sure. But with that said, it's also going to take a lot of time to get it up to pair with what we know from Linux. So it's a compromise in a lot of the sake. And in some cases, I would even say that customers are looking to isolating a lot of the stuff they do with VMs and just leave it on there. And when they feel that they can move it onto a .NET platform, then they will definitely do that. What I typically see Windows is being used is when they have net new application that needs to be developed, then they would start on Windows to begin with, Windows.NET Core, for example. So that's the path that they would typically go down with. And last and not least, there's also the Azure Arc. It didn't exactly make my list, also because it's not GA, but if we have time, I'll try to short circuit some of the cool stuff there. How do you deploy it? Right now, it's going to be a node pool, and then you basically just go inside and create a node pool with AKS node pool add, and then you select. Let me actually just show this in my screen. See if I can. So what you do, fairly straightforward, is the AZ AKS create a command. So you give it a node name. And you need to give it a how you want it. In this case, I'm just enabling the public IP address because I was having some fun. But also the interesting one, when you run Windows workloads, the images is not surprisingly bigger. They definitely are. So what I would strongly suggest is to also increase the node OS. That's definitely something that a lot of customers need to look out for and be cautious when they actually do that. So I can quickly go in and actually show you some difference, how you can check up on that if you have something like that running today. So if you just use the default disk IOPS perspective, you will typically only have around 500 IOPS per disk. So in this case, I actually increased it with a larger disk, which also going to be giving me 1 terabyte of disk space as well. So you should be fairly good in that sake when you do garbage collection. And also be cautious when you do garbage collections, because the way how you're going to be doing limiting the CPU and memory is a bit different when it comes to a Linux machine. So that's just something to be mindful when you do this. Good. So let me jump back to the presentation. The latest build is actually also quite interesting because you often want to make sure to see what releases are actually inside the product itself. Quite a big important one as well. So if I go into the text document that I have right here, and this is just for the AKS engine because those guys are doing some cool jobs about writing the specification about the images, and in here I have all the feature sets that's actually is deployed out of the box. These are updated quite regularly, and you cannot just go inside the node and write an upgrade Windows command in PowerShell, but you will actually need to create a node pool. So you need to think about doing blue-green deployment if there's anything you need to be upgrading on. That's at least the recommended path for right now. So that's a bunch of stuff. That's also handwritten languages support. I have no idea what that is in there, but it's there. And so it's good information just to have a look at this if that's something that you're going to be looking into and you're interested in. Good. So what else? SNAT. SNAT is just a ridiculously big topic in itself. Why? Because SNAT is basically a way how we can control, monitor all the outbound traffic that we are basically creating. The way you can quickly monitor that is just to go in, do a search for the load balancer, and it should pop up. So if you do see some memory weird stuff happening with your pods and you don't really understand why that is happening, so this is one I've encountered quite a lot heavily for the last period of time. You can actually go in and automatically go in and select the load balancer standard, and then select the SNAT ports, and then you can actually see that how many ports is automatically allocated for you and how many you are actually using. So this is a good way of indicating. For example, I had a customer where they did an API call. For each API call they did, the routine basically created a new connection going out. That meant that they would have connections up to 600,000, and they wouldn't actually be caught by a VM where they compared those two solutions with each other. So luckily, we identified that the way they did the API calls actually created an exhaust in SNAT ports. So that's a big one you need to be sure about when you actually do play around with this. Cautious of time. Moving on, we also have something called the Azure policies, aka OPA Gatekeeper, which is sort of an out-of-the-box feeling, touchy stuff you can do inside the Kubernetes cluster. It basically decouples all the policies from the API server with the means of using a mission controller. It's ridiculously underestimated and extremely powerful. We see two use cases I typically see it being used for is for DevOps pipelines. So instead of you build the whole pipeline and then you basically shoot it in and then you figure out, oh, it's basically blocking or doing some stuff that you didn't want it to do. And then you need to cancel that deployment and redo it from scratch. So if you could move up the ladder inside the release pipeline, saying when you build it, you actually also test it right away if it's fulfilling the requirements for having a namespace, for having a label, for having some audit instances that you need to have in place before you can actually roll out a given pod. Those features out of the box is definitely key for success when you think about all this. So what is it basically? So Gatekeeper basically has an open policy agent, which is the OPA. As the name intended is the policy agent. So it has an agent. The Gatekeeper can be thought of having it's in a mission controller, and it can actually also do a mutating admission controllers. So it can take your request and then would allow it or wouldn't allow it. Or it can take your request, mutate it, and push it into something else. Something to be cautious about is that if you have a lot of Kubernetes objects inside of Kubernetes clusters, you need to be cautious about how many of policies you're basically going to be throwing out. This would typically impact more larger customers, but it's definitely something that you should be cautious about. So if I go into my Kubernetes clusters that I have a GKE clusters. I have a GKE cluster running in here. Then I want to be controlling about what can I do from my workload running on GKE. Now, you might be wondering why I'm using a GKE. It's just because I apt enabled it so I can actually talk to it and throw down policies on top of it as well. I could have done this with any other clusters on premises or anything else as well. So in this case, I can assign a policy to my cluster, and it pops up with some parameters. In here, I can do I can exclude different kinds of services. I don't want it to be hitting all my Kubernetes cluster or virtual machines running. I can go in and select the policies in here. I can do Kubernetes filtering directly out of the box. And then I have some pre-made definitions policies made for me out of the box. Typically, they are made for the top use cases that we typically see out there. Pod security policies has deprecated. If my memory serves me right, don't hold me up on that. I think they're going to pull it out entirely out of Kubernetes around 120 or 121. We are going to be deprecating it in October, if my memory serves me right. But you can easily do more or less the same with the policies that you have in here. All policies are based, by the way, written in Rego, and you have that integration to write your own custom policies as well, if you want to do that as well. I don't have any in this cluster here, but you can definitely do that as well. When you done it, you can select a given policy, and depending on which policy you select, you also have the option to give different kinds of parameters. For example, that if you do want to do a regular expression in regards to securing your container registries, then you can add that to the parameters, click next, and then you'll shoot it off. So that's basically the part for the all open policies, which I definitely encourage a lot of you folks to go. I'm going to skip some of the slides here due to time, but Azure Identity is something that's pretty big, and how do we basically do the integrations with our Kubernetes cluster? Those are definitely something that you need to be looking into. So in this case, we have a user. He's a Azure AD V2 enabled. we need to do some authentication, and a lot of you guys have been working with the interaction of pipelines. You don't want to be typing in stuff because that's the way authentication it works on Azure. 118 is definitely a game changer in that sense. So if you go into the CLI and you do a set, let me make it a bit bigger as well. I can do that. My memory is pushing me, and now everything is lagging. Okay, let's try again. ASET, AKS, create and help. So what you need to do when you create your cluster is to make sure that you use a flag called enable AD, but also enable the admin group that you want to be using. You can have multiple AD groups in here. And the way you actually do go ahead and actually locate those is actually to enable a Kubernetes cluster. During deployment, it points at the object ID of the Azure AD group that you created. So in here, I'm just going into Azure AD. Before, we also needed to be, we needed to have global admin rights to be able to create a cluster, which really didn't make a lot of sense. But now you can just have your own tenant and you can just do it without that. Also, service principal names and all of that app registrations, I almost said something that bad, is gone. Also, refreshment of all that keys is also gone. So now you can use the MSI out of the box directly from the cluster itself. So the object key here is key. That's what you need to provide the CLI when you do a provisioning of the cluster. And then you basically shoot everything off. And then the cluster in itself actually gets an identity, which then you can also authenticate against other Azure services if you want to be doing that as well. I think that's definitely one of the bigger game changer in that sense as well. A big one that you can actually quickly do as well is actually verify if you are running on V1 or not. You can actually just cat out your kube config file and check if it has a public cloud there set at the end of the kube config file, and then it should be present in there. If you have that, that's actually V1. I was actually originally intended to demo that, but we don't have the time for that. So make sure you actually do that. You can also upgrade existing clusters that are not Azure V2 enabled, but also RBAC clusters. You can actually also upgrade all of those. So just go into the Azure AD group, and then it's out of the box how to actually upgrade that. Now, if you forget to set a flag, there are also fallbacks authentication methods to do. It's not recommended, but this is a last resort. And the reason why I'm saying that is because when you do a ASET get credentials, you will get a certificate. That certificate is typically super hard to also revoke again. So you actually need to do an entire cluster rotation of the certificates, and that's fairly expensive exercise to do. So just be wary about that. 7 out of 9. We have a lot of security products out there, and it sort of comes back to my my first slide that I basically had, how you basically create all your things for ingresses, outgress, security, namespaces, and so forth. This is definitely something you need to consider. Azure Security Center Basics, I think it's basic version, that is free, comes out of the box. Azure Firewall is also quite interesting. I'm seeing, depending on the applications, that you don't really care about what's coming in, but you want to make sure that all the traffic that leaves the cluster is secured. You can use the outbound time for that and do all of the cool filtering on the application firewall. Application gateway is a common one that a lot of our customers are using. And then we have the application gateway ingress controller, which is also something that we're going to be adding as an add-on. And that basically does all the application gateway stuff automatically and sets everything up. It's actually a pretty neat. And we even added a lot of the CLI content out of the box, so you can do it directly from provisioning time. And also be controlling how flows is configured from namespace to namespace out of the box as well. There's a lot of security audit policies you can do as well. Have a think about that, which one you want to be using. That's definitely something you can look at. If you want to go more deep on these specific areas, you can also just create your own policies in there as well. Front door versus traffic manager versus ingress controller. There's a lot of stuff you can do here from a traffic perspective, but I would say, depending on the app, it's actually the app that actually decides what you can do. Do you need to have some type of sockets that need to be connected? And how long do they need to stay alive? Is it static? Is it dying? How do the application basically behave? Then accordingly, I would select the fitting application and the app accordingly to those. I'm not going to go in details what each of them are, but also just a last point. Rasmus, can you just make this one big? This one is more or less a medium post that's pretty good, and it's not entirely up to date, but as it goes pretty fast. But have a think about the ingress controller you want to be using. In the Nordics, we like Traffic Manager, we like Traffic, spelled like this, and in Nginx. Down south, they're big fans of ambassadors. In Nginx, Istio are starting to have their own, same as Linkerd, and there's a bunch of other ones as well that are quite interesting as well. So that's definitely something you need to think of, test off, and depending on the application, you will select the one that will be, at least for you guys, a good fit for that. Moving on, proximity group. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I do see a tendency for doing a lot of machine learning. Machine learning in itself can be a bit complex. So in the Kubernetes community, we see a lot of simplicity in this case, in this sake. We have Kubeflow, which is getting a lot of traction as well. But also the machine learning group, product group in Redmond as well, is doing a lot of integration and using the AKS as the infrastructure to do some cool stuff. But also, if you want to run HPC like services, and why not use AKS for that? We do have a batch service, which is also super good, but it can maybe be a bit harder to lean up towards. But if you already are familiar with Kubernetes, it could be something that you would definitely benefit from. So this is where the proximity group placement is, where you basically have physical grouping of services running, with also the possibility to spread them out in availability zones if needed. I typically see this in finance and oil and gas. It's pretty big. Gaming is also definitely there, and that shouldn't be underestimated. Kubernetes Resource Explorer. Last slide, Rasmus. I know I'm over time, but let me just show you the last demo in here. Something that's a quick and dirty one to just start debugging your cluster itself, which is also quite difficult and something that I encounter again and again and again. What you can do directly from the UI is actually to go in here, select the namespace that you want to see. You can see that there's something terminating, hanging inside your cluster, and you can click it. You can go in and see and click events if there's anyone present directly from the portal, so you don't need to use the CLI. The reason why I'm showing this is because you don't have a lot of admins that have the deep understanding about using the kubectl commands, but now you actually would be able to go in and directly control a lot of these from the portal itself. So that's definitely something I want to encourage a lot of you guys also to be utilizing and looking at and see if this is something that's useful. I do think I have one in this one. That's just auto cluster. Oh well. How are we on time, Rasmus? Can I continue, or do you want us to make it short?
Yeah, just finish this one off, and we have some good questions warmed up for you. So just
that's very good, very good. I love that. Okay, so let me. I want to have time for Q&As as well. So, but also just simple stuff like I can be able to see my clusters. I can see my external IP address. I can click my external IP address and go directly to the website. Simple stuff like this is super powerful, and you can actually see what's going on. So you can actually also go and drill in directly through the portal itself. Monitoring as well. We don't have the time for that, but that's definitely something I would encourage you guys to be looking at as well. To simply build some dashboards, create dashboards that shows the health of your Kubernetes cluster. There's a lot of the stuff that's out of the box. How you can monitor disk capacity, disk IOs. They even made it possible for you to do monitoring. You can even see the logs coming in and which one are costing you the most from monitoring the control plane versus monitoring namespaces and so forth. So that's a lot of cool stuff that you can can help you out in order to debug a cluster and set it up and make sure everything is running. So that's the approach that I wanted to take today, to walk you through all the content to see and give you a good understanding about how to utilize the tools that are out of the box there, but also the third party like Prometheus, Grafana. We have Linkerd and Istio, if you're liking that, and so forth. It's just about creating a baseline for something that you want to have and streamline it throughout your organization. So I will leave it here, Rasmus. That was fast.
Thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate it. So I was listening to you and said, when is he going to drink water? Because he's been speaking for 45 minutes straight.
I was getting dry. So I was like, oh, I'm running out of time. So I need to step it up and drink some water halfway through. I was like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm a machine.
No. Excellent. So Gustav, we have some good questions. I know I said I would interrupt you with the questions, but I kind of sensed you had something on your mind you want to share. So you know what, we had very early on a very good one, and really not putting anything between it. So just before we go to the first question here, let me just remind you all, please do complete the survey. We need your feedback and appreciation. So before you drop off, just use it. This time it's so quick that it's almost like you get an hour back. I mean, it's like negative time to complete it. I really done my best this time to make it fast. So please, we live by your feedback. So the first one, Gustav, is from Martin, and Martin is actually one of my colleagues here. So he loves containers, but probably mostly the metal boxes. But Martin calls out here, what would you recommend someone not to use Kubernetes? And I think there's two questions here. The second one is, which skills, willingness is required to use it?
I think that's probably some of the best questions I had ever. And my answer is, I have actually done that several times and told them, your organization and it's just not capable of lifting a Kubernetes workload. So I told them, thank you for inviting me, but you shouldn't do this. And then I went home early. So I did that. And to answer why, it's actually fairly straightforward. First of all, they didn't have the Kubernetes knowledge. At the same time, it didn't feel that the organization per se were committed to embracing the open source world in that sense, and learning Kubernetes and learning what this would say. And secondly, they didn't have the profiles that would fit. And the profile is always a bit difficult. As long as you have the passion, you can learn it. That without a doubt. But there needs to be passion also inside the in the organization, and it didn't feel like they had that at that point in time. And this is half a year ago, and they still haven't done that, by the way. So yeah. Which skills is required? Can I say the F word?
Sure, go ahead.
Fuck it. If you have the passion, that's definitely the whole skill set you would need, because you can ramp up in no time. That's cool workshops on different kinds of GitHub websites. We in my organization, we build our own training material as well. There's Kubernetes has its own. The CNCF has a cool Kubernetes exams you can do as well. So that's what I would do. Yeah, next.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, Martin, for the question. So what are the benefits of integrating AKS with Azure Arc?
That's also a good one. So the way you should think about Arc is that you want to be so don't think of AKS, but think about it of overall Kubernetes clusters that you want to talk to, or actually virtual machines for that sake as well. So you want to be controlling an environment. If it's a VM or a Kubernetes environment, doesn't really matter. You want to shoot it out, some policies out. You have an agent. You want to make sure that it's also being helping the organization, making sure that you have monitoring in place. You have, because then you're compliant. You need to have some certain stuff in place to be compliant. You want to make sure that you're shooting out images correctly. You want to make sure that you have a monitoring agent out there. And all of these steps is something that that Azure Arc is actually addressing and helping. At the same time, we are running private previews where we also do it with data. That means SQL stuff, for example, you want to be monitoring that. We've been in talks with a lot of disconnected scenarios where you have a fairly big boat that sails around the globe, and it often has some scenario where it doesn't have internet connection. Well, but you still want to uphold all the configuration management tools from a policy perspective that is in place. Then you can also utilize that for that case. You still need to have access to Azure. There is a certain threshold. If you pass that, your certificate for Mark will be revoked, so you can't use the control plane on Azure anymore. And then it will be considered as something that's not compliant anymore and kick that resource out of Arc. So that's pros and cons that how you should look at this, just like Anthos. That's it.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you, and thanks for the question. So I think Jan has a very concrete question that landed while you were explaining the policies.
When will it be GA? I was actually hoping to say Ignite. The problem is all this COVID freaking thing is rambling our roadmap overall. We do have a website where on GitHub, let me see if I can remember it, but we do have an AKS GitHub website where we track all the GA stuff. I can't exactly remember when that is due, but I'm fairly sure that it's going to go GA soon. So I'm actually hoping for Ignite. I can't remember, to be honest. I need to follow up on that. But go into the GitHub AKS project and then look up projects, and then you should be able to see it as coming out to GA really soon.
Yeah, we have Ignite coming up in a couple of weeks, so that's the release festival of Microsoft.
Yeah. We're definitely going to be aiming for that, but I can't promise anything right now.
No, of course, no. That's fine. That's fine. I think if you can provide the link, or if it's easy to Google to the slide that you have there, I think that's useful.
How can I? Yeah, can you share my screen? Okay, yeah. Sorry. So it's up here. Fairly straightforward and fairly fast to find.
Okay, cool, great, thank you. Let's take another one. This one is a bit more detailed. Open Service Mesh. Are there any plans to get integrated with Azure Insights for distributed tracing and application map?
I hope so. So it's not going to be dependent on directly on the Azure Insights, applications insights as it's called. It's going to have its own traceability, but it's going to be more of a sidecar angle, because that's what it's using to do all the metrics and so forth. So if you want to have a distributed tracing, and I'm guessing that you're probably thinking about the UI where you have an app from application insights, how you can see the calls and how the big latency is and so forth. It's gonna be more of what Linkerd has when I showed you the squared boxes, and you can see how they are calling each other, and then see a percentage of the request per second and how that's going. That's going to be the first iteration. How that is evolving, I don't know, to be honest.
Okay, cool.
But if my memory serves me right, it's actually going to be coming when you deploy it. You can actually enable it to come with Jaeger, so that's actually going to give you all the application insights out of the box as well.
Okay, speaking of applications insight, Nikolai has a question here. How would you rate applications insight to Prometheus or Grafana?
You can't. It's two different kinds of doing it. One is being driven by a team in Redmond. The other one is vastly used, and I would even say that Prometheus Grafana would have way more users out there worldwide than Application Insight has as well. The community in itself is just huge, right? And there's a lot of native integrations as well. We have the Azure Monitor, you can plug that directly into Grafana and Prometheus, and then you have that out of the box, which is also super cool. And so it's not really compatible. What I would actually be able to say, depending on what you want to be looking at as well, is that make sure that the agent that you're going to be using for whatever monitoring you're going to be doing also doesn't take up a lot of resources. That's key for success, especially in large environments as well. I hope that sort of answers the question, but that's how I would look at it, at least.
No, I think that's very, very honest. Do you know if the Microsoft product teams or your own engineering community is contributing to Prometheus or Grafana?
Yeah, we are. We should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
With the Azure Monitor is the best example of that.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Philip here has a great question as well. Why should we use AKS over app service on containers? Does the learning curve and complexity of Kubernetes worth the time and effort?
Really, really, really good question. The best way to answer it is to have is to answer it black and white. One is the app service, where you have a whole user interface, how you want to be scaling it. There's a bunch of other integrations points, and then you can automate it, and you press a button and you leave it, and you don't really care about it anymore. For large environments, I typically see customers are moving over to AKS, but also customers that has the passion for learning AKS. That's also the cost perspective, which also needs to come up. App service is typically a bit more expensive than what AKS is, and I was actually seeing that as a factor for companies learning Kubernetes as well. And then no, I can't talk about that, but that's app service. But overall, the experiences what we see from app service is it's, if you're a small company and you just want to host something that's fairly straightforward, stay away from Kubernetes, because it's going to be taking a lot of time just for managing, creating it, updating, and thinking about the whole process, pipeline, and so forth. Whereas app service is just a few clicks, then you're up and running. So I would stick with that and then move to AKS if you want to do something that's more hands-on.
If I can add something from my work, and for the guys who doesn't know me, I work in a large enterprise called Maersk. So we are quite happy with containers, but we have 50 plus AKS clusters, for example, just to give you some order of magnitude. And what we say is start small. You might want to be using containers to deploy your workloads, but that doesn't mean that you need to start with AKS, right? There's so many ways to host your containers today. So start small and grow into it. I think that's a really good practice, and just echoes what Gustav just said here. Okay, let's take the last question then. We're also at the top of the hour and respect people's time. So one last one. Very specific one. When would you use multiple node pools?
All the time. So you should definitely use this. Classic use cases. Node pools can be done blue-green deployment. So you have new version 1, version 2, and then you're releasing version 3, version 4, so forth. You can do that on a node pool basic. Do traffic split behind it, so you can control. So you basically reload 10% of all the incoming traffic to one node pool. If that node pool sees there's a lot of error messages popping up, a lot of 500s, for example, like we saw in LinkedIn, then you would roll back and just stick with node pool 1 before you go and upgrade it to node pool 2. There's also the architecture, how to, when you have a node pool can be dedicated to a specific availability zone inside Azure, but it can also be spread out on various availability zones. So that's also a different way how you want to be thinking about it. So you can have one application that's dedicated to a specific area because you have some microservices that need to be closely next to each other. Then you can lock it down and have them there as well. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Again, guys, on the chat, thanks a lot for the question. We're trying to make this as real as a real meetup, and the interactions from you guys really helps me I hope it helps you, and I'm sure Gustav appreciates the questions as well. But I was speaking to Gustav just before launching here, and we definitely miss being in the room, right? But this is what we.
Yeah, we were supposed to be in the studio today.
Yeah.
That could have been fun, actually.
Yeah. We'll do it in a couple of weeks then. But Gustav, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's clear that you are passionate about this topic as well, and we really appreciate your straightforwardness and sharing your passion with us. And for the people on the stream, thanks for joining. Don't forget the survey. We live by your feedback. And with that, I'm ready to close the stream. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good day, guys. Cheers.
Bye.